Magandang araw mga bata! Ako si Ma'am Regine, ang teacher mo sa math. Today we will be learning about measures of variability. This is a lesson for grade 7 mathematics under quarter 4, lesson 8 and 9. Kaya tara na, and let's do the math. The sigma symbol, which is the standard notation for writing long sums, will still play an important factor in computing for the measures of variability, just like how it did when we computed for the measures of central tendency. The measures of central tendency do not always give sufficient information to analyze a situation and make decisions. We need a summary of measures that tells us whether the values are clustered closely about the mean or spread over a wide range of values. That is what the measure of variability is for. It is a numerical descriptive measure used to indicate the spread of the set of data. It measures the degree to which the scores are spread out or clustered together in a distribution. There are four main types for the measures of variability. We have the range, average deviation, variance, and standard deviation. Each of them can be applied in either a grouped and an ungrouped data. First, we will be using these measures of variability for an ungrouped data. Starting off with the range. In an ungrouped data, the range is the difference between the largest and the smallest value. Let's have an example. Calculate the range of the grades in mathematics of each of the group of learners. We have two groups. We have the male group and the female group. For the male group, we have the grades 95, 65, 75, 85, and 90. While for the female group, we have the grades 84, 86, 85, 82, and 83. Dahil ang hinahanap ay range, we need to find out the largest and the smallest value in each of the groups. For the male group, ang ating largest value or highest frequency ay 95 at ang kanya namang total opposite na smallest value or the lowest frequency ay 65. Well, for the female group, ang ating highest frequency ay 86 at ang lowest frequency ay 82. To compute for the range, for the male group, we need to subtract the lowest frequency from the highest frequency. Substitute natin yung values. 95 minus 65 is equal to 30. Therefore, the range for the male group is 30. While for the female group, using the same formula, substitute natin yung ating mga values. 86 minus 82 is equal to 4. Therefore, ang ating range for the female group is 4. Now, if we look at them at an entire population, say it's a whole class with 5 males and 5 females, and we're looking for the range, the highest frequency will still be 95, and the lowest frequency will still be 65, and the range for the 10 of them for the entire class will still be 30. Next to range, we also have the next measure of variability, the average deviation, which considers the deviations of the individual scores from the mean. Ito ang ating formula for average deviation, where AD stands for average deviation. We also have the sigma notation, which stands for using the addition process. X is the individual frequency, X bar is the mean, and the N is the total number of frequency. Aside from those, we can also see the absolute value of X minus X bar. It is the absolute value of the deviation from the mean. In simple terms, what you'll have to do is to subtract the mean from the individual frequency and then get its absolute value. Aside from that, we also have the sum of all the absolute values of the deviation from the mean. Sa average deviation, para makompute natin ito, napaka-importante ng mean. Mean is one of the measures of central tendency, and this is the formula for mean in an ungrouped data, which is X bar stands for mean. We also have the sigma notation for summation. F is the frequency and N is the total number of frequency. Let's have an example to find out the average deviation. We'll be using the same sample problem that we had earlier, but this time we'll be computing for the average deviation. Ito ang ating formula ng average deviation for an ungrouped data. At ito yung mga elements na kailangan nating mahanap para makompute natin ito. Let's construct a table with 3 columns and 10 rows. Yung ating first column ay para sa ating individual frequency. Yung second column natin ay para sa mean. At yung ating third column ay para sa absolute value of the difference of the individual frequency and the mean. Meron tayong 10 rows para dito sa ating 10 data. Yung ating set of data, we consider them as one class with 5 males and 5 females. At write them down in the first column. Ganon din yung mga scores ng ating female group. All in all, we have 10 total number of frequencies. Now, for the mean, this is the formula of the mean for an ungrouped data. We need to add all these frequencies or scores together and then divide it by the total number, which is 10. Substitute natin. Adding them all together, ang ating result ay 830 divided by 10. The mean for this set of data is 83. Write it down in the second column in each of the rows. Next, i-fill out naman natin yung ating third column. We just need to subtract them together and then get its absolute value. 95 minus 83 is equal to 12. 65 minus 83 is equal to negative 18. Absolute value, kaya always positive ito. Kaya instead of negative 18, we will write down positive 18. 75 minus 83 is equal to negative 8. Absolute value is positive 8. 85 minus 83 ay 2. 90 minus 83 is equal to 7. 84 minus 83 is equal to 1. 86 minus 83 is equal to 3. 2 is the result of 85 minus 83. 82 minus 83 is equal to negative 1. Absolute value, kaya naging positive 1. And lastly, 83 minus 83 is equal to 0. Once you have these deviations, add them up. The result will be 54. Ito na hinahanap natin na element for the average deviation for the numerator at pati na rin yung ating end, which is the total number of frequencies. Substitute natin yung mga values. 54 divided by 10 is equal to 5.4. Therefore, the average deviation for this set of data is 5.4. Next, the average deviation, we also have another measure of variability, which is the variance. Variance is the average of the square deviation from the mean. Kung mapapansin natin, yung ating formula for the variance ay yung ating formula for the average deviation as well. What we'll have to do is to raise it to the power of 2. We'll have to get it square. And once you do so, instead of average deviation, magiging variance na siya. And this is the symbol for variance. This is also called as the sigma symbol, just like this. Both of them are sigma symbols, Greek alphabets. Ito kasi ay yung kanyang lowercase at ito naman yung uppercase. Kumbaga sa ating alphabets, ito yung small letter at ito naman yung katumbas niya na big letter. But both of them are known as sigma. Once you have squared the formula for the average deviation, this is now the formula for variance. For us to compute for the variance, it is very important that we know how to distinguish between a population and a sample. Population is defined as all the members of a specified group, while the sample is a part of a population that is used to describe the characteristics of the whole population. Looking at this example, the entire population consists of 10 students, 5 males and 5 females. And these are their scores. We have 5 scores for males and we have 5 scores for female. Ang ating total population consists of 10. Kapag naman sample, we're only getting a part of the population. Say for example, 95 lang yung kinuha natin. Out of the 10 scores, 95 lang yung ating kukunin as a sample. Pwede rin naman na male group lang or female group lang. 5 scores out of 10. Or pwede rin tayo mamili randomly. Say for example, kukunin natin ang 65 and 75 from the males 86 and 82 for the females, 4 out of 10 lamang. Ganun kapag sample lamang yung ating kukunin out of the population. Population is the whole group, all of them. Well, for a sample, the size can be less than 1% or 10% or 60% of the population, but it is never the whole population. Importante na alam natin yung difference ng population in the sample because there is a slight difference in the formula between the two. We have what we call the population variance. This formula is for computing the variance of an entire population. We'll be using all of these data, all 10 of them. Itong ating total number of frequencies for the population variance, this is equal to 10 because we have 10 scores in this entire population. Whereas, kung ang ating kukunin ay yung sample variance lamang, we need to deduct 1. Let's have a closer look between the population and the sample variance. We'll be using the same word problem, but this time we'll be computing for the variance. Specifically, we will be computing for the population variance, and this is the formula. Ito yung ating table kanina from the average deviation. We added one column for the square of the absolute value of the individual frequencies minus the mean. To fill this out, we'll be looking at the third column. Each of them, i-erase lang natin siya to the power of 2 square each of them, or simply multiply them by themselves. 12 squared or 12 times 12 is equal to 144. 18 squared is 324. 8 squared is 64. 2 squared is equal to 4. 7 squared is equal to 49. 1 squared is equal to 1. 3 squared is equal to 9. Another 2 squared is equal to 4. 1 squared and 0 squared is equal to 0. Once filled out yung ating fourth column, add them up, and the total will be 600. Ito na yung hinahanap nating element para masubstitute natin dito sa formula ng variance, specifically the population variance. Substituting the values, we have 600 divided by 10, which is the total number of frequencies. It will result to 60. This is the population variance for this set of data. But say for example, we're not able to get all these 10 scores. Ang available lang sa atin ay yung part of it, pero yung kabuang score ay hindi available. Instead of the population variance, we'll be computing for the sample variance using this formula. Ang ating population size ay 10, pero say for example, ang available lang sa atin na scores ay 7. 7 out of 10. Randomly picked, we have 85, 65, 95, 83, 84, 90, and 75. At yung tatlong natitirang scores ay unavailable sa atin, hindi natin alam. That is why we'll be computing for the sample variance. Prepare this table with 4 columns again, 7 rows para dito sa ating 7 na samples. The first thing you need to do is to write down all these individual scores in the first column in no particular order. Pwede mo ring i-arrange in an increasing or decreasing order, doesn't matter. The total number of frequencies that we have is 7 because our sample size is 7. Next, for the mean, we'll be using the formula of the mean for an ungrouped data. Add them all together divided by 7, which is 577 divided by 7, and it will result to approximately 82.43 rounded off to the nearest hundredths. Kapag alam mo na yung mean for this set of data, write it down on the second column for each of the rows. Once done, fill out naman natin yung ating third column, absolute value of the difference of the individual scores in the mean. Subtract them together and then get their absolute value, meaning always positive ito. 95 minus 82.43 is equal to 12.57. 65 minus 82.43 is equal to negative 17.43. Absolute value, kaya naging positive. 75 minus 82.43 is equal to negative 7.43. Absolute value, kaya naging positive. 90 minus 82.43 is equal to 7.57. 84 minus 82.43 is equal to 1.57. 85 minus 82.43 is equal to 2.57. And lastly, 83 minus 82.43 is equal to 0.57. Once done, fill out naman natin yung ating fourth column by getting the square of each of these data. Starting off with 12.57, 12.57 squared or 12.57 multiplied by itself, 12.57, it is equal to 158. 17.43 squared is equal to 303.80 or 303.8. 7.43 squared is equal to 55.20 or 55.2. 7.57 squared is equal to 57.30 or 57.3. 1.57 squared is equal to 2.46. 2.57 squared is equal to 6.60 or 6.6. And 0.57 squared is equal to 0.32. Once done, add them up, we'll get 583.68. Ito yung ating kailangan na data dito para i-substitute natin sa formula for the sample variance. Substitute the values. We have 583.68 divided by 7, which is the total number of frequencies, minus 1. Perform the operation. We have 583.68 divided by 6, which will result to 97.28. This is the sample variance for this set of data. Magbalik tayo dun sa ating na-compute kanina na population variance, which is 60 for the entire population. Dito sa ating sample variance, where we use the sample size of 7, we got 97.28. As we notice in the result, the calculated sample variance is slightly higher than if we would have used the population variance formula. The purpose of this little difference by lowering the sample size by 1 is to compensate for the fact that we are working only with a sample rather than with the whole population, to get a better and unbiased estimate of the population's variance. The last measure of variability is the standard deviation. It is the measure of the variation of the set of data in terms of the amount by which the individual values differ from their mean. In simple terms, standard deviation is the square root of the variance. That is why we'll be using the formula for the population and the sample variance. Para sa population variance, ito yung ating formula. At sa sample variance, ito naman, yung ating total number of frequencies ay lowered by 1. If we take out its square root, instead of the variance, magiging standard deviation na siya. So this is now the formula for the population standard deviation, and this is now the formula for the sample standard deviation. Simply said, ito yung ating formula for standard deviation. It's the square root of the variance. Depende na kung ang ginamit ay population or sample variance. Let's have an example for the population standard deviation. We will be using this formula. Ito yung ating last data from the variance when we computed for the population variance. Ang ating na-compute dito na population variance is 60. Substitute natin yung value. Square root of 60 is equal to approximately 7.75, rounded off to the nearest hundreds. Therefore, the population standard deviation for this entire set of data is approximately 7.75. While for the sample standard deviation, ibabase naman natin yung ating computation doon sa sample variance. Ang ating nakuha ay 97.28. Using the formula of the standard deviation, which is the square root of variance, substituting the value of the sample variance in the formula, that will be finding out the square root of 97.28, which will result to approximately 9.86 rounded off to the nearest hundreds. Therefore, the sample standard deviation for this set of data is approximately 9.86. We will now focus on the measures of variability for grouped data, starting off with the range. Let's have an example activity. The data represents the scores of the 40 students in a mathematics test. Ito yung ating raw set of data. We have 40 scores for each of the students. Yung ating first task is to compute fourth range. First thing that we'll need to do is to organize this raw set of data into a frequency distribution. We have the given number of classes 8 and the class width must be 3. Construct a table with 3 columns. First column is for the classes, second column is for the tally, and the third column is for the frequency. Fill out the first column with the class intervals. We have 8 classes, therefore we also have 8 class intervals. Each of them, ang kanyang class width ay 3. After mong ma-form ang mga class intervals, tally the scores into each of the class intervals, and then write down their numeric equivalents or their frequencies. Then add them up, we have 40. To find out the range for group data, ito yung kanyang formula. Upper class boundary of the highest class interval minus the lower class boundary of the lowest class interval. Looking at our class intervals, it is arranged in an increasing order. That is why, itong ating class interval 28 to 30, this is the highest class interval. Where 28 is the lower class limit and 30 is the upper class limit. To find out the upper class boundary, we need to add 0.5 to its upper class limit, which is 30. Kaya naman 30 plus 0.5 is equal to 30.5. Ito na yung ating upper class boundary of the highest class interval. Ito naman yung sumunod nating hahanapin. Kailangan nating malaman yung lowest class interval, which is 7 to 9. Between 7 and 9, 7 yung ating lower class limit at 9 naman yung upper class limit. Ang hinahanap natin ay lower class boundary. Kaya naman 7 minus 0.5 is equal to 6.5. 6.5 now is the lower class boundary of the lowest class interval. Once we have the needed value, substitute them in the formula. 30.5 minus 6.5, the result will be 24. Therefore, the range for this set of data is 24. Next, the range, we have the average deviation. Yung ating task is to compute for the average deviation for the same set of data. Ito ang ating formula for the average deviation for a grouped data. Kaya naman kailangan nating magdagdag ng 3 more columns. Yung ating fourth column, this is for the class mark. Fifth column is for fx or the product of the frequency and the class mark. At yung ating sixth column ay para naman sa ating mean. Because we know that to compute for the average deviation, it is very important that we find out the mean first, which is one of the measures of central tendency. And since this is for group data, we'll be using the formula of the mean for a group data. First thing that we need to do is to fill out the fourth column, the class mark. This is a familiar term to us. This is discussed in lesson 3 sa frequency distribution. It is the middle value in a given class interval. So for each of these class intervals, kukunin natin yung class marks nila. For class interval 7 to 9, ang class mark ay 8 because 8 is the middle value. 7, 8, and 9. Middle value ay 8. 10 to 12, ang class mark ay 11. 40 naman ang class mark ng 13 to 15. 17 is the class mark of 16 to 18 class interval. Sa 19 to 21, ang class mark ay 20. 23 ang class mark ng 22 to 24. 26 ang class mark ng 25 to 27 class interval. And lastly, for the class interval 28 to 30, ang kanyang class mark ay 29. Next thing that we'll need to do is to find the product of the frequency and the class mark. Simply multiply them together. 1 multiplied to 8 is equal to 8. 1 times 11 is equal to 11. 4 times 14 is equal to 56. 6 times 17 is 102. 14 times 20 is 280. 10 times 23 is 230. 3 times 26 is equal to 78. And lastly, 1 multiplied by 29 is equal to 29. Add them all up, we have 794. Ito yung ating kailangan na elements para makompute natin yung mean. Substitute the value 794 divided by 40 that is equal to approximately 19.85 rounded off to the nearest hundreds. Once we're done computing for the mean, write it down in the 6th column at pwede na nating makompute yung average deviation. Add another 2 more columns. Yung ating 7th column is for the absolute value of class mark minus the mean. At yung ating last column ay for the product of the frequency and the absolute value of class mark minus the mean. Una natin i-fill out ay itong ating 7th column. Titignan natin ay yung column for the class mark, pati na rin yung column for the mean. What we'll have to do is to subtract them together and then get its absolute value, yung kanilang positive value. Starting off with 8 minus 19.85, that will be negative 11.85, absolute value, kaya naging positive. 11 minus 19.85 is equal to negative 8.85, absolute value rin, kaya naging positive. 14 minus 19.85, 5.85, get its absolute value, kaya naging positive. 17 minus 19.85 is equal to negative 2.85, get its absolute value. 20 minus 19.85 is equal to 0.15. 23 minus 19.85 is equal to 3.15. 26 minus 19.85 is equal to 6.15. And lastly, 29 minus 19.85 is equal to 9.15. Once done filling out this column, i-fill out naman natin yung ating last column. Ang titignan natin ay yung column for the frequency and the column for the absolute value of class mark minus the mean. Multiply them together. 1 multiplied by 11.85. Ang sagot ay 11.85. 1 multiplied to 8.85 is equal to 8.85. 4 multiplied to 5.85 is 23.4. 6 multiplied by 2.85 will result to 17.1. 14 multiplied by 0.15 is equal to 2.1. 10 times 3.15 is equal to 31.5. 3 multiplied by 6.15 is equal to 18.45. And lastly, 1 multiplied by 9.15 is equal to 9.15. Add them up, ang ating result ay 122.4. Ito na yung ating kailangan na elements dito sa ating formula for the average deviation. Substitute them. 122.4 divided by 40 is equal to 3.06. This is the average deviation for this set of data. Next is the variance. We'll be computing for the variance for this set of data. We will consider these 40 scores as if these were samples from the entire grade 7 population. So we only have the scores of 40 students, pero yung buong grade 7, we have 500. Kaya naman natin gagamitin na formula ay para sa sample variance. Add more columns. Yung ating 8th column ay para sa square of the absolute value of class mark minus the mean. At yung ating last column ay para sa product of the frequency and the square of the absolute value of the class mark minus the mean. Unahin muna natin i-fill out yung ating 7th column. We'll be looking at this column only, the absolute value of the class mark minus the mean, and square each of them, starting off with 11.85. 11.85 squared, or simply 11.85 multiplied by itself, 11.85, the result will be 140.42. 8.85 squared is 78.32. 5.85 squared is equal to 34.22. 2.85 squared is equal to 8.12. 0.15 squared is equal to 0.02. 3.15 squared is equal to 9.92. 6.15 squared is equal to 37.82. And 9.15 squared is equal to 83.72. Next, i-fill out naman natin yung ating last column. Kailangan nating i-multiply yung frequency, pati na rin itong ating square of the absolute value of the difference of the class mark and the mean. Multiply them together. 1 multiplied by 140.42, it's 140.42. Ganun din. 78.32 pa rin ang resulta. 1 multiplied by 78.32. 4 multiplied by 34.22 will result to 136.88. 48.72 naman ang result ng 6 multiplied by 8.12. 14 multiplied by 0.02 is equal to 0.28. 10 multiplied to 9.92 is equal to 99.2. 3 multiplied to 37.82 is 113.46. And lastly, 1 multiplied by 83.72 is equal to 83.72. Add them up, we'll have 701. Ito na yung ating kailangang elements para masubstitute natin dito sa formula for the sample variance. Substituting the values, we have 701 divided by 40 minus 1. We are deducting 1 to the total number of frequencies because we are using the formula for the sample variance. Perform the operation. 701 divided by 39 is equal to approximately 17.97. This is the sample variance for this entire set of data, given that this data is treated as a sample out of the entire population. But say for example, we are treating this as the entire population. Halimbawa, a class has 40 students. Since 40 yung students at lahat ng scores nila ay nandito, we can treat this as a population. Therefore, we will be using the formula for the population variance. It's the same formula, kaya lang wala tayong minus 1 dito sa total frequency. Substitute the values. We have 701 divided by 40. That is equal to approximately 17.53. Pansinin natin yung difference between the two. Laging slightly higher yung ating sample variance. That is why we are making up to it by lowering the total number of frequencies by 1. Right after variance, we'll be computing for the standard deviation. Unahin muna natin yung sample standard deviation because we treated this as 40 samples out of the entire 500 population. Ang formula ng standard deviation is the square root of the variance. Substitute the value, square root of 17.97 from the result of the sample variance. It is equal to approximately 4.24. Ito yung ating sample standard deviation based on the sample variance for this entire set of data, given that it's treated as a sample only. But say for example, we treat this as the entire population for a single class, we'll be basing our standard deviation from the population variance. Yung ating formula ay pareho lang din naman, square root of the variance. However, yung ating sinubstitute na value dito ay based na sa population variance, which is 70.53, which will result to approximately 4.19. Notice the difference between the two. Laging bigger yung ating standard deviation based on a sample variance as compared to the standard deviation based on the population variance. And that's it for our video for today, mga bata. Give this video a thumbs up kung natulungan kayo nito sa inyong lesson. Also, feel free to comment. Subscribe to my YouTube channel, Ang Teacher Mo sa Math, for more grade 7 content. Turn on the notification bell para lagi kayong updated kung meron na tayong bagong video. And of course, don't forget to share this video para mas marami pa akong mga grade 7 na batang tulad mo ang maabot at maturuan. Dahil ako si Ma'am Regine.